And now, whether you've been waiting for it or not, it's the Drunken Tyromancy show. And that kind of came across rather suddenly. I was going to do the fadey thing, but yeah, just didn't work out that way. Anyway, so I shall go take a seat and chat with you. I didn't produce a video as yet for the last article I published because I want it to be a subscriber-only content thing. It's my first one that I've done, and it's a fairly significant piece of work based upon a lot of thinking over a very long time about the question, does God exist, or does any God exist, and what exactly does the question mean? And it's not done, all right, to aggravate religious people or anything like that. I mean, as many of you might know, if you know me, I'm an atheist, but you'd be surprised that I am one, given the answer to the question, which is actually a paradox. So the purpose of the article that I've written is to define the question, like completely, fully define the question to actually make sense of what it actually means. And then in the next article that I'll write as part of this series, it's going to then answer that question. And so it goes into like a lot of maths and logic and things to give us a basis to actually decide whether or not we can answer the question, and then, well, how would we go about doing it if we could? And when it gets to the answer, which I'm not going to tell you what it is, right? You've got to kind of give me some money to help me so that I can keep producing this stuff if you want to know the answer to that one. Now, I'll keep on producing some other free content, and I will, after some point in time, produce some more subscriber content, but that's what this one's about. And the thing is, I'm about to go on holiday, and hang on, excuse me. Yeah, I've still got this off. So look, I'll just switch across to this as well while I'm here and just make sure. Yeah, there we go.
Switch this one off. I'm heading off traveling for the first time in a long time, which is going to be a little bit difficult for me because of the spinal damage that I have and sort of other injuries, which I'm working my ass off exercising, trying to make sure that I'm strong enough and fit enough to actually travel. And so before I leave, I just wanted to produce like a short video about this article. And then at a later date, what I hope can happen is that I can produce another video, which is like maybe a live stream, where we can actually discuss the question. But for me to be bothered doing that, of course, I'll need to have built an audience. And that was what I was hoping this article would do, given that there are so many religious people in the world who might want to know a logical and mathematical approach to this question. And what I will say is that even though I'm not in this video going to reveal anything much about it, the answer to the question actually allows you to choose either way, right? Now, from my perspective, I've chosen to remain an atheist because the nature of the answer to the question is such that I just don't see the point personally in believing in a God, right? I can see that there is a valid basis to believe in one if that's what you choose to do. However, I see that as being a very, very limited perspective. And what I seek to do in my life is to see things from the greatest possible perspective. And that was how I actually came to defining the question and answering the question, is to look at it in those kind of terms, as like, what is the greatest possible perspective through which we could ever answer this question? And what are all the fine points of detail that you need to understand in order to then answer it? And for those who might think that a question like this is unanswerable, I'll say the following. The reason why it hasn't been answered previously in history is simply because I think that in order to answer it, we had to go through various other processes of discovery about philosophical logic and argument and reasoning, and to develop a lot of mathematics and so forth. And what happened in that process is we did actually develop all the tools, as I discovered, but the question remained something that people looked at in a very simplistic light. Nobody went to the trouble of really fully getting into it and it really just came down to like people arguing for or against based upon what they already believed. And when I look at pretty much everything everybody's ever done about this, I keep just seeing that, like just different versions of this thing where people already have a position, and then whatever that position is, that's how their answer is biased. And they never properly define what the question means. They never, put it into such a rigorous format that you could really sort of say, wow, like they really have gotten this question defined, much less the answer. They've just skipped straight through to the answer because they want it to be true or they want it to be false. And the truth is that it isn't that simple. You don't get a yes or no answer at the end, right? If you've come down to a yes or no answer, then you didn't define the question properly. So anyways, that's the most clue that I'm going to give you as to what the second article will actually say when I go about answering it. But for those of you who are interested, please do subscribe, have a read of that first article, and, give me some support so that I can keep doing this work. Because one of the reasons that I'm traveling is just to get away from everything. I have not traveled for many, many years. I don't have an income. Right? I'm doing it off the basis of savings, and so hence one of the other reasons I'm traveling is in the hope that I can make business contacts overseas and sell off some intellectual property or something to help support myself. Because a good friend of mine who runs his own audiovisual podcast basically told me that it took him 4 years to develop an audience. And I'm thinking, shit, well, I haven't got 4 years. Like, I can't support myself for 4 years and not have developed an income out of this. So in the meantime, and I will keep going with this work, but in the meantime, I have to think seriously about what else can I do to make money, given my spinal damage, given everything going on in the world, because of course I'm not going to survive beyond a certain point unless I can really get like an influx of capital into my life to invest in myself and to support myself. As you might be able to tell from my surroundings, I'm just in my own room. That's it. Like pretty much everything I own is in this room. There's a handful of things in the garage and a handful of things that I haven't brought up here yet, which are still in storage elsewhere. I lost a lot of stuff in the floods that many of you might know about that happened like in northern New South Wales many years ago, because all those things were in storage under another house and I was in a different state at the time, watching on the satellites, looking at this rain coming down, looking at the river levels and thinking, that's it, I'm fucked, I've lost everything. And that's what happened. Like everything in storage, gone. Like it was just destroyed. And this included original writing, it included original artwork, it included all of my university notes for several subjects, it included like textbooks from university. And while other people might not place much value on that, it was some of the only stuff that I had, and it was meaningful to me. And having lost all that stuff, the only thing I've got now is the memory of it. And some of it wasn't replaceable because it was unique. And there were other things that I lost in there too, like clothing and I think there was some sporting things and tools and, like other stuff that, like all told, there would have been a few $1,000s worth of stuff. And for me, that was all I had, aside from the things that weren't there. And so that's all gone. So now what I have to do in my life is to pursue this, producing content, writing, producing videos, and to find other things that I can do without placing stress on my body. Because if you don't know me or my history, I've done over 130 jobs in my life. Now, sometimes it's the same job, different employer. But this includes a lot of labouring, amongst other things. And during those years of working as an audiovisual technician and labourer, I was subjected to a couple of industrial accidents, one of which, for example, was a 40-foot long steel pole falling at free fall velocity and smacking on the top of my feet, which, I only got one of them partly out of the way and the other one just, both got crushed, but it took me 2 years to be able to run again. And because I was one of the bigger guys on the jobs, often there were things that other smaller people couldn't do. And so you're the guy that they picked to be the human forklift to, go off and do something that other people they're just physically not capable of it, which places you under an enormous stress. Like if any of you out there have ever lifted 3-phase cable, and you'll know what I mean. Like if you're starting to roll up 3-phase cable on your shoulder, it is heavy. And I was doing that underneath a stage at the big day out, like where, you know, you basically got a stage, you have to crouch down, you've got to climb through the scaffolding underneath the stage while carrying 3-phase cable over your shoulder. It is an enormously difficult task to do that, like because you're not just sweating in this under the stage area, but you're having to sort of crouch over while carrying an enormous weight. And so I've done many things like that in my life. I've had sporting accidents as well, like where I was off snowboarding and fractured my ribs and smashed my head into the ice and smashed my shoulder. And like, you know, yeah, I was a mess after that. And another sporting accident in high school that, you know, did a bit of damage. I mean, various accidents over the years. And so my body has been put through hell, shall we say. And I'm lucky in many respects to still be walking. But there was a period of time where I couldn't walk easily, and then it happened again later with other injuries. And so now I'm just kind of like trying to basically rebuild my strength, rebuild my flexibility, my fitness, and to basically be confident that while I'm traveling, I can, you know, indeed, it's like, it's kind of nerve-wracking if you've been in a situation before that you could be off in a foreign country where you don't know the language, you don't know anybody, you don't know the culture, you don't know the systems, and you're out there carrying luggage, having to walk some considerable distance with physical injuries. So that's what I'm, you know, kind of preparing myself for. Anyways, so what I hope is that through this trip, not only will I have a bit of fun and bring some joy back into my life, but I'll also make some really good contacts overseas. I'm going to a mini conference. For those of you who listen to Matt Ehret of Canadian Patriot, or Cynthia Chung, and I think they're both together in, they've got a foundation, name eludes me for the minute, but if you look up Cynthia Chung and Matt Ehret, you'll find them. But they're doing like a little mini conference, and I'm going to travel through Southeast Asia. I'm hoping to learn to cook in each country and learn massage and language and things like that, so that I can kind of, you know, get a feel of each culture and hopefully teach some English or something along the way to reduce the cost of my travel, make my way through to China, I hope, to hopefully, because I mean, you know, as you know, they can make anything. So I'm hoping that what my own country didn't support in my ideas, I can find somebody else there to sell the intellectual property. And, you know, even if I'm getting a smaller chunk of it, at least it's something that can contribute to my life and to contribute to doing the things that I actually want to do. Because I have developed heaps of stuff over the years, and there's a lot of it that I'm not particularly emotionally attached to. So I don't mind selling it off and letting somebody else run that show in exchange for a payout of some sort. Whereas there are other projects which are more meaningful to me and which are more important in terms of my overall vision of, and for those of you who aren't familiar, I've had a long-standing obsession academically, which came from my teenage years, where I began asking the question, what would it take to produce a completely, totally, utterly, ecologically and socially friendly and sustainable civilization, which at no scale would ever break from the individual through families and smaller groups to communities, you know, sort of regional, you know, sort of populations of people, or even an interplanetary society. Because what we have at the present are inherited systems of economics and politics, which are I guess you could say they're the best that anybody figured out, but the point is they're extremely vulnerable to corruption, as you've seen, and they're extremely vulnerable to the kind of people that you really don't want having power, getting to the top and just ruining everything for everybody, including themselves, and they're too stupid to see that that's what they've done. They actually think they're winning when indeed they too are losing, because they're fucking morons, right? They are seriously dumb people, and I wouldn't even credit any of them with being remotely sane. And you see what they're doing in the world at the moment, right? It's like they literally have no ability to economically perceive any scenario in which, you know, they are not the parasites at the top, and they don't give a shit if everything goes to hell, just so long as they're on top of the shit heap. That is all they care about. And they call that winning, to make the world less and to therefore have less to experience because they destroyed and enslaved and controlled everything to the point where what's it worth anymore? Like, why would anybody want to do that? But that's how insane these people are, and they just can't see it. And for the rest of it, it's easy to see, right? So anyways, so my questions that I started asking in my teenage years went through a lot of iterations. And in that process, I had a person close to me who was reading some very kind of, new agey 1980s kind of books where it was all about like, oh, don't worry about the threat of like nuclear war in like, because that was the time of the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the West before it broke up. And, I remember this person reading books which were saying you don't have to worry about it because there's alien guardians who are looking over the planet and, they have stopped this thing, happening. And so, you have guardians. It's like, I thought, where is the evidence? Now, I'm totally okay with anybody, reading anything they want, no matter how seemingly absurd. And I'll even like ask the question, well, could it be valid? But I want to see real evidence. I want to see a really solid argument. And I never saw anything from that. It was just claims being made via channeling. And for me, that's not good enough. Now, I'll happily listen to somebody who claims to be channeling if what they produce sounds like some wisdom, which is useful and you can get some benefit out of it. Because if that's the outcome, then it's like a placebo. It doesn't matter if it was really channeled. What matters is, was the advice good? Did it work, right? Because if a placebo works, then use it. And there are plenty of doctors who do that quite validly. They have successfully used placebos intentionally to help a person cure themselves, because the very belief in the placebo was enough to change the person's attitude and to change their body chemistry and so forth, because what they were doing beforehand was just committing themselves to dying or being sick or whatever. And if you shift that attitude, you shift a lot of other things in the process. Now, we don't need to know exactly what it's doing and how. If the placebo works, then use it. Same thing with like a lot of spiritual new agey things. I don't give them a lot of credit, even though I myself looked into many of these things through my teenage years. But what matters is, do they get a result? So I went through this process of asking these questions about civilization, seeing this person reading these books and asking, further questions about, if there are these aliens, then why aren't they sending us blueprints for useful stuff? And probably there are people out there who believe that they are, but again, I see no evidence. I just see claims being made, and a claim is, I don't care how much you believe it, without the evidence, all you're doing is asserting something as true. So what I then encountered into the 90s, as I left high school behind and went through other things in life and re-encountered people eventually who I hadn't been in touch with for a long time, and got into tertiary study as a mature age student for the first time, I went from swinging out in one direction of this kind of like metaphysics and spirituality in my teens through to looking into logic and philosophy and maths and science and engineering. And I found that I had a great love and passion for it, but it introduced a lot of deeper questions about, marrying these two worlds together of, well, if there's any validity to this other stuff, then it has to be congruent with this. How do you make that work? And so I got into the concept within mathematics and logic of how you identify a paradox and resolve the paradox, right? And that's a big part of what these articles that I'm writing are about. And there's another set of articles that I'll write in the future, which again use this, because from my perspective, of all the logic and maths that I studied, this is one of the most critical, valuable things that comes out of that realm of logic and maths is paradox and the resolution of paradox. If you can understand how logic and maths helps you with that, then there are so many puzzles you can solve, because ultimately what you're doing is you're seeing some of the fundamental differences between reference frames or perspectives. And this is part of what Einstein was going on about with relativity is this idea that different reference frames or different perspectives can provide a different result about the same originating event. So when I now combine all these things in this question of what does it take to create an ecologically, socially friendly and sustainable civilization, I had to look into issues like justice. And there was at one point where a very good friend of mine, who I haven't spent a lot of time with for many years now, and which I miss greatly because we had an enormous number of brilliant conversations at cafes around Melbourne when we were both there and in Ballarat before that. But this guy who I think when I encountered, because we hadn't seen each other since primary school, and when I encountered him again, he was doing some postgrad studies and then later he got into his first attempt at a PhD. But he, sitting at a cafe one day in Northern Carlton in Melbourne, he proposed the question to me. He said, "Trevor, can we quantify justice?" And as a consequence of everything I'd studied and he'd studied and all our past conversations, I instantly knew, yes, we can. I didn't know how yet, but it just like there was something about everything we'd been talking about which just twigged in my mind and said, yep, we can do that. I just got to figure it out. And by the end of 2 weeks, I was able to come back to him and say, here's how. Now, it was only a very rudimentary form of calculating, what it means to actually quantify justice, but I did it nonetheless. So when I say rudimentary, I mean it was fully like binary. It was like, on off. It was that crude. But over the years since then, I was able to add granularity to it so that it became more and more detailed, more and more meaningful. What does it really mean to quantify justice? And in that process, I came to an understanding about the interdependence between justice and sustainability. And also the notion that in order for something to be truly just and sustainable, it must be so from a non-species biased perspective. And this is really crucial. So a lot of my work then focused on, well, okay, how do we make that actually happen in terms of the social systems that people need to live their lives and to be free to express themselves while having social cohesion as well, and given the fact that we have contrary interests to other species at times. I mean, particularly for somebody who eats meat, for example, it's like, yeah, well, you have a contrary interest. How do you balance that? And so I figured out like a lot of things about this and then started to develop systems around it and so forth. So this is where down the track, I want to be pushing a lot of resources into sort of further developing these ideas. In the meantime, this whole podcasting biz thing is about me having some fun and producing interesting content and hopefully sort of gathering an audience so that as I do other projects, I've got an audience that I can sort of feed to those other projects, and which I hope some members of my audience would then get involved in those other projects, and that the funding would become available to actually pay people to get involved, or pay them for the contributions they make, where those contributions actually get used directly or indirectly to produce some tangible result. So anyways, I hope that some of you will over time go to the article, which you'll see in the links, is currently, as I make this video today, it's currently only on Substack because I had a difficulty with the word limit to put it on locals. Now, I can probably split it up further, but I'd already split the article into two parts, being defining the question, and then the second half, which is mostly written, is then providing the solution to the question. And I didn't want to break that question up into two articles because it's like a whole train of thought, and I'd like people to follow that as a single kind of journey without sort of taking part of it and then taking a break and forgetting what it was about and then coming back to it later and, having to remind themselves, it's better to sort of keep it as one stretch. But locals won't let me do that, and it's already, as succinct as I can make it. So over the coming weeks and months, I don't know how much content that I'll be producing because I won't be here anymore. I'll be on the road in other countries. and, you know, sort of on a budget with what I can carry. And I don't actually have a phone that's actually good enough for recording, you know, sort of mobile on the go the way a lot of people do. So I'm going to have to contemplate the value of actually purchasing such a phone, you know, out of my budget. And maybe that'll be cheaper to do overseas as well. And I have to continue paying rent here. Fortunately, my rent isn't that much more than it would cost for a storage unit for my stuff. So it'll kind of work out roughly the same. And at least by keeping this place, I have a place to come back to when I return. But anyways, so I hope you will subscribe and help me produce more content. And I'll do my best to record stuff along the way. There might be a possibility, perhaps like through meeting Matt and Cynthia at this upcoming mini conference, that I'll get to do some work with them. I would certainly love that. And I'm hoping along the way that I might get the chance to meet Carl Zar. If you're not familiar with the Silk and Steel podcast, Carl Zar is brilliantly funny. He says he's in Bali. I don't know if I'll get to meet him or not, but I hope so. And I'm hoping to meet many other people along the way that I've personally tuned into their work. And yeah, I think like that's about all I've got to say for the moment. So yeah, I wish you all well, and I will see you down the track. Thank you.